is Father Robert Healey. He serves as the parochial vicar at St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church. Parochial victor, read that associate pastor for those of you who don't like the vicar and the parochial. He's a native of Tulsa, and he completed his undergraduate studies at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, and he obtained his Bachelor of Arts degree in English and History. And he attended then St. Meinrad Seminary in southern Indiana, where he studied philosophy before completing his theological training at Mount St. Mary's Seminary of the West in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was ordained a Catholic priest in June of 2020 and is currently serving in his second priestly assignment here. His first was in Tulsa. Father Healey's interest in the Shroud of Turin, the topic of his talk today, began when in 2010 he had the opportunity to travel to Torino, Italy, and see the shroud, the original shroud, firsthand. He has given numerous talks on the subject and is excited to be able to share some of the history and science surrounding the shroud with us today. Would you please help me welcome Father Robert Healey?
Can I be heard with this? Okay, very good. Thank you so much for having me. This is a distinct privilege and something I've never had the honor to do before, to present to a Rotary Club. And so I would like to, just first thank you all for this opportunity. It is a topic that's very dear to my heart, as Larry mentioned in the introduction. I began to have an appreciation for the Shroud of Turin really when I went to Torino, Italy, got to see the shroud. The actual Shroud of Turin, it's called the Shroud of Turin because it's in Turin, Torino, Italy, is only displayed every 25 years, or when there is a particular celebration that is being called for, because it's a very precious artifact and it's always behind, bulletproof glass and all sorts of things, lest any harm should come to it. The shroud itself, as what you have right here, is actually a replica. This is the actual size of the shroud. A lot of people don't realize it's so huge. It's 14 feet long and 3 feet wide. This is actually a second-rate replica. I have the first-rate replica at the parish, and I give a presentation every spring during Lent or during Easter time, which is a more extensive version, goes into a lot more detail than I'll be able to go into with you today, obviously because of length of time, but also there are various different aspects which we won't be able to get into today. But what I want to share with you is a little bit about the history and the science surrounding the shroud, and the history of the science surrounding the shroud. This is a picture of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Torino, Italy, which is where the shroud is kept. How did the shroud get there? We don't entirely know. The history is very hard to trace, but it's believed that the shroud came into the house of the Savoys when one of the scions of the House of Savoy was in Jerusalem serving in the Knights Templar. And when the Knights Templar, there was a member of the House of Savoy who was I don't know what the term would be, of the head Knight Templar. And when the Knights Templar were suppressed with all sorts of accusations, which were largely false and it was primarily a money grab because they were very wealthy, the shroud, which was reputed to be in Jerusalem all through that time, disappeared. And it's believed that it was taken, that he sent it with some friends to family in Savoy, France. So it went through Constantinople to Savoy, and it was a personal possession of the House of Savoy until really into the 19th century, when it was given to the Church in Torino, which is where it is now. This is what it looks like when it's on display. It's in this beautiful big frame case, and so it was a delight to be able to be there. So the shroud itself, when you look at it up close, you see that it has a frontal image and a dorsal image of a man depicted upon it. On the dorsal image, you see a face, the chest, crossed hands, legs down to the feet, where there is an appearance of a mark of blood coming from a nail mark. And then the other half is a dorsal image. And the reason is because the way that the burial practice of the Jews in the time of our Lord worked, there was a process where you place the body in the final step upon a large piece of cloth this size and then fold it over. Dirt is scarce in the Holy Land, so they don't have private burial spaces like we have, where you dig a grave and you place the body there, and that's where it stays. You have a stone bench where the body is placed, and it's accessible to the air, and so microbes and things get in, and there is a very rapid disintegration of the body, and then the body is removed to somewhere else. And so this was the way that so what we see is that the body would have been actually laid upon the on this side, and then this is flipped over, and so you have contact transfers of blood on both a frontal image and a back image. So something like this. Now, when we look at the image itself, we see it's very vague. It's hard to see the image. In fact, if you're right up close to it, you can't see it as well as if you step back to a little bit of distance to be able to see. The blood does in some sense give definition, but it's not the main image. The main image of the face is not, that you see there, is not actually blood or anything on the cloth. And so one of the things that is a mystery about the shroud is how this image is on it, or how it came to be on it. We're going to get into that. I'd like to talk to you very simply about 4 points, the modern scientific study of the shroud. The first would be the photographic analysis. Before there was anyone ever given permission to cut a slice out of it, to study it in a laboratory, most study was through photography. And in fact, the scientific interest in the shroud was launched because a photographer by the name of Secunda Pia in 1898 took a photo of the face of the shroud. And what he was expecting was to see a photo negative on his plate when he pulled it out of the liquid. It's a big glass plate this big. Here's the picture of his camera. So he uses this big glass plate with chemicals that he placed on it, and then you take the whole glass plate into a dark room to develop. Thank you. Whatever. We don't do much developing of camera film nowadays, but when he pulled the glass plate out of the liquid, the developing liquid, he was so shocked that he actually dropped it and it shattered, because he never had pulled a plate out of the liquid and seen something that was actually a photo positive of the image. The photo negative is always much bigger and less vivid, but when he pulled the photo out of this is what the shroud looks like, this is what he got. He got a very vivid face looking at him right out of the glass, and no wonder he dropped it. And so this is actually the second photo of the shroud, because he had to go through the process again and take another photograph and develop the frame. So photography and this discovery that when we photograph the entire thing, we see it in the photo negative, we see a most remarkable image of a man depicted upon the cloth, both the front and the back, with blood right in all the right places upon the head for a crown of thorns, deep scourge marks at angles like this, which would fit with someone who was scourged at a post or a pillar. Someone would not be scourged with vertical strokes, because that's very hard to do. Side strokes wouldn't make any sense. The natural stroke pattern is this diagonal that we see. And so in the face, we see these big gashes up on the top of the head and the back of the head too. And you look at the shoulders here, and we see these the sideways marks, the blood running down the length of the arm, and scourge marks front and back the whole way. Furthermore, right here on the right side of the photonegative, which would actually be the right side of the man who is depicted on it, if the shroud itself is the photonegative, is a wound which is bleeding very much. Now, these triangular portions you keep seeing on the photos, those are burn marks. That's where the shroud was burned. It was folded, and it was in a silver box, and there was a fire, and the box was rescued out of the fire, but a corner of it had melted. This was back in the 1500s, and so that corner was burned. And so when you look at the full shroud, you see a progression of the size of those burns. Here again is a picture of the back, and you can see there's a blood running on the back of the. Anyway, so the idea of the scourging that is depicted very accurately in Mel Gibson's scourging scene was very much to try to imitate what we see actually deliberately in the shroud. These marks coming across that were from a Roman flagrum. And finally, this is the picture of the back of the feet and the front of the feet, and you can see the blood running down. It's an amazing artifact, and this photography led to really the second aspect of modern scientific study, which was the STIRP project in 1978. The STIRP project was a group of scientists who came into Italy, into Torino, and they made a study of the shroud. And their findings were astounding. These were world-renowned scientists across the world who had come in thinking they were going to find a hoax, and they were saying, it's real human blood on the cloth. It's type AB blood. It's got hemolysis, which represents, we know this isn't just blood that someone squeezed out of a vein. This is from a violent death. That the blood marks on the shroud are blood exudates from actual major wounds of a man who died upright as a result of crucifixion. And so these scientists, studying what was going on, seeing that the image itself of the face is actually discoloration of the cloth itself, of the fibers of the cloth, and only on the superficial level, the first 3 fibers, depth, and no deeper. And there's nothing on the cloth where that image is. So the STIRP project's findings were amazing. They were these scientists who were doing scientific studies and said, we cannot explain how this image is on here, nor can we explain how we have retained this, but it's very authentic. And then the carbon dating that everyone knows about, 1988. Where have you been, Zine? I've been Zine you all my life. 1260 to 1390 is what the carbon dating proudly says. It's a medieval forgery. It couldn't be any older than 1260. Now, the problem with this carbon dating announcement was it just tore away all of the scientific study that had been going on before that. All of the findings of the STIRP project disappeared from people's minds, and everyone just says, oh, it's a hoax, and they walk out. And all the questions are, how on earth is there real human blood on it, and an image that doesn't seem to be, how is the image able to be produced on there? So basically, the scientific study since 1988 has been basically examining the process of carbon dating, examining what can go wrong, why there isn't why there is so much lack of interest in the shroud after a carbon dating statement says it's a hoax, when there is tremendous scientific study coming for it. What the post-carbon dating studies have done is they've discovered new information. They have questioned the validity of the 1988 carbon-14 dating and asked, how did the image come to be there anyway? This is an example in 2005, Thermochemical Acta said the linen contains no vanillin, and vanillin is a material that is in linen, and it has a known half-life, and in order for cloth to have no vanillin in it, the very fastest it can completely deteriorate from the linen is 1,300 years. So the shroud has to be at least as old as the 9th century, and could be as old as 3,000 years if it took as long as possible. The University of Padua in 2013 performed 3 major studies which located together, the overlap of those 3 studies located the age of the shroud in the 1st century AD. Just in April of 2022, last year, the Institute of Crystallography in Padua performed an X-ray dating of the shroud, studying the structural degradation due to natural aging of the cellulose in the fibers of flax, and they said, here's something that we can study with X-rays, and so it's repeatable, unlike a carbon dating sample where the sample is destroyed and no one can go back and verify it. X-ray dating, you can verify it again and again and again because you're using X-rays to study it. And they took a sample that was 0.5 millimeter by 1 millimeter, and they took it right from the same spot where the 1988 radiocarbon samples were, and the structural degradation, the cellulose in the fibers matched most closely known linen fabrics from the 1st century in Jerusalem. So I think the most exciting, most fascinating of all of the studies that I've learned about with the shroud was this 2005-2010 study in Italy, which they said ultraviolet light can actually produce a discoloration of linen fibers, similar to the discoloration on the shroud. But you have a comparison in which the longer it's exposed, the brighter the image, but the deeper it penetrates. And so to have a very, very surface penetration, but to have it as clear as it is, you would have to, they said, have an ultraviolet light made by a lamp that is 34,000 billion watts, 34 trillion watts. And to put that in perspective, a dinky average lightning bolt produces 10 billion watts. And so we're talking about you'd have to have an ultraviolet light capable of putting the image on the shroud. Even with this image, that is 3,400 lightning bolts in operation. So anyway, this is some of the delightful stuff. There is a lot of scientific study that is even coming out now. And on the shroud.com website, Barry Schwartz, who was one of the STURP team members, has actually been collecting that and retaining that. So I encourage you to visit that website. So anyway, thank you very much for having me, and it's been a delight to present to you today.
Any questions?
I have one. How did you make your display? Did you make it or?
So the display is a combination of the replica here, but then the wooden frame is actually a product of Oklahoma State engineering. My father is a graduate of Oklahoma State, and he did received an engineering degree. And so the problem was how to make a frame that is 14 feet long and 3 feet wide and can hold this display, and yet at the same time can pack up and fit in a vehicle. So it's the fabric. So this I purchased. Pardon me?
I said, did you paint it on?
No. It is so the image on this piece of cloth is from a photograph. The image on the cloth that I have, that I keep at the rectory, at the parish, that doesn't go traveling around because it's really too precious, is from the 4-inch by 5-inch photographs that the STURT team took, very, very high. So it is the best kind of replica you can get. And I finally got that replica because I had been giving lots of these talks and wanted to have the best replica. So if you come to the presentation in the spring at the parish, you'll see that one. Yes.
Many years ago in the 90s, I remember talking with Teddy Hall at the University of Oxford, who did the carbon-14 dating, and Mike Tite at the British Museum. And they were both adamant at the time that the carbon-14 was correct. And since then, although there are other studies, as you have pointed out, no one has yet said that the carbon-14 is wrong, as I understand it. So, they're conflicting. There's no doubt that they're conflicting, but has anybody said the carbon-14 is wrong? And there are 3 independent labs. It's not just Oxford. Has anybody said that the carbon-14 is wrong because they made this mistake?
Yes. Thank you for your question. I appreciate it. I kind of abbreviated my talk. It's just usually an hour-long presentation. And so the 2022 X-ray studies, part of what their findings were, I focused on their examination of the structural degradation. One of the things that their study also stated, because really the stage since 1988 has been, you have to disprove the carbon dating to even get a hearing, because the carbon dating has been so decisive about things. One of the things that they point out in their study is they say that textiles are very hard to carbon date because cloth, just as much as anything, but most especially cloth, is capable of taking in content. You can have microorganisms that colonize within the cloth. If you see discoloration of fabric due to just wearing it, right, or soaking cloth in water, it's capable of actually making up the biochemical things that can colonize within the very molecular structure of fabric, can actually make up 50% of the weight of the fabric. And this cloth was not preserved within a glass case for 2,000 years. It was handled, it was breathed on, there were candles burning in front of it, and so there's a lot of reason to believe that it could be contaminated by way of carbon dating study with lots of carbonate, lots of living matter, living organisms, and finger gunk and candle soot and things like that. And so what they say is that part of the problem with the carbon dating is we can't repeat it. So we don't have any idea what went wrong or what went right in the carbon dating because it destroyed the sample. But there is good reason to believe, and all of the studies since 1988 have said there's good reason to believe that there was added carbon-14 since the foundation of the cloth, because the cloth is demonstrated on so many levels to be so much older than 1290.
What do we know about the shroud from 33 AD until the Templars took it in the Crusades?
We do know that it was preserved in the church in Jerusalem. That it was believed that there were certain artifacts that were preserved by the faithful Christians in Jerusalem. Over, even as we have other relics of things from the first centuries. So there's a lot of faithful, handing on of things and tradition that surrounds as well. So.
One more?
Yeah,
Cody's
thank you. I hope to make this brief. It seems like there's a lot of effort to prove with science that this is real.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know from your perspective as a leader in the Catholic Church, but also a man of faith, how this can be used to strengthen our faith in Jesus Christ.
Thank you for your question. I think it definitely strengthened my faith in Jesus Christ to come in contact with something that he that literally has his blood on it. When you can encounter something that you can see, admittedly, the scientific world has been trying to prove or disprove using scientific means. If the shroud is authentic, it's not because it's proven by science. If it's proven by science, it's because it's authentic. And so I firmly believe, from the things that I've experienced and the things that I've seen, and the experience that I had going there, that it is indeed the cloth that it purports to be. There's only one person in all of human history who matches the description of the man we see displayed on the shroud himself, and it would be a man who's about 5'11", And so the contact that we have with someone who is as precious to us as our Lord, when we can actually stand before a piece of cloth that was right there at the time of the resurrection in the tomb, it deeply impacted my faith to be there, just as much as it impacted my faith to when I got to go to the Holy Land and I was walking in the places where Jesus walked and kneeling on the top of Mount Calvary and things like that. So.
One
Last
more.
one.
I think it will be a quick one.
Okay.
If there's blood there, then is there not DNA there? Have we done any DNA studies of what's there?
I don't know that it's. I can't claim to be a blood chemist or a blood scientist, but I do believe that blood doesn't contain the human DNA in the same way as other parts. So if I give a blood transfusion, I haven't given my DNA over to someone else. So I don't know. Have I? Okay. So I don't know that how much of that is possible to do with blood, but I know that what they have been able to determine is that it's type AB blood, that it tests positive of hemoglobin and all these various different. So anyway, there are other people that are much more qualified to answer that question than I do. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Father
Okay.
Healey. Thank you for a great program. Fascinating information.
Okay.